Technically, from the libertarian view, isn't the passenger the one who was violent?
Based on the contractual obligation that he has entered into, he is being aggressive. Well, hey everybody, welcome to Owls at Dawn. We are just two dudes from Southern California who studied philosophy, politics, and religion around the world and decided to start a podcast where we could bullshit with impunity. I am Austin Hayden Smith.
And I am Troy Polidori, and yes, that is around the world, which means we've taken many flights.
Around the world, around the world, around the world. So we're going to start off this episode the way we start off every single episode, where one of us gets to rant about whatever it is that is pissing us off for this week, or this month, or this year, or in life in general. Troy, what is your shitty minute?
So I had a legitimate shitty minute, which is going to be about why I don't like the fact that we use exams to assess students, since midterms just happened.
Yes.
But you know what? Fuck that. Because this weekend, I was on a flight, and actually my flight was fine. But in the airport, I was struggling. It was Sunday. I was tired. I had multiple bags around my shoulders. I decided to go grab a latte from Starbucks. Actually, no, it was Pete's, not Starbucks. And I love Pete's. And they heated up the milk so much that even after waiting a minute or two to drink it, it burnt the living shit out of my tongue. So much so that it's now, what day is it? Wednesday?
Wednesday.
It's Wednesday, we're recording this, and it still hurts so bad that I can barely talk.
It
and
still
I had to
hurts.
struggle through 3 straight days of classes in pain the entire time while I'm trying to talk. I've basically drank like an entire ocean full of water just to try and assuage the pain.
Okay, so walk me through how you consumed the latte.
I put the Starbucks or Pete's cup to my mouth and I started to drink it.
Now, did it have one of those? It was a to-go cup, I'm assuming, yes?
Yeah.
So did it have one of those lids with the little slit in it?
Yes.
Or were you lidless?
No, there was a lid.
Okay, yeah. You and I briefly talked about this beforehand, and I said I was going to argue with you because I believe you're at fault. Partly, at least. Partly. And the reason is because those lids are impossible to gauge temperature beforehand. And you know this. How many times have you drank a Pete's coffee to go? How many times in your life?
Yeah, I mean...
No, how many times?
Much,
honestly.
But a lot. Dozens.
No, yeah.
Dozens.
Dozens. How many times have you had Starbucks coffee in your life?
I mean, I don't drink coffee. I only drink tea, but yeah.
You know, how many times have you had one of those lids is my point.
Yeah, a shitload.
Okay, and you know the rules for operating one of those lids, right?
Except, okay, here's the thing. If it's a water-based deal, or if it's just regular coffee, I get that. I'm not just going to drink it after a minute or two. I'm going to make sure.
Yes.
I know all the stories about people burning the shit out of themselves with coffee and all that. But a latte is mostly milk.
Yeah.
It's a tea latte. So if you heat the milk up so much that it's going to burn the shit out of my tongue, then you ruined the latte and you suck at your job.
You do. You're right. That person does suck at his or her job and has definitely ruined that latte. Because, okay, so I've worked at coffee shops quite a bit, right? And there are temperatures in which, there's a range in which you're supposed to settle your milk temperature before you make your drink. And some people just do the hand test, and then some people use a thermometer. The good baristas just do a hand test, right? And you also can understand by the sound once you start to get really good at it, and then you can also just by time is another way that people kind of do it. But when you do it long enough, you understand what the range is of temperature. And it should never be so bad that it burns your tongue. Not only is it dangerous, but it also ruins the fucking flavor. Because milk tastes gross when it's all cooked like that.
Oh, yeah. I had to throw the whole damn thing away. And I didn't have time to go back and ask for a new one or complain about it because we were getting to our gate. So, you know what?
You complain about it now.
Exactly. That's why I'm doing this. Usually, I'm not the type. I'm not going to use my shitty minutes to complain about bullshit that happens to me. But this is my exception because I've had to work through the last 3 days of talking when my tongue is dying. If you're wondering why I'm talking right now, it's because I just like literally gargled honey for the past 20 minutes.
Is it still hurting you that bad?
When I talk, it does.
Really?
Yep.
Yo,
Right
that's
now it's fine though.
that's crazy. That's like
Yeah, I'm a bit worried that I'm gonna like lose my tongue.
you're so
I'm
melodramatic.
gonna be what is that? Is that dumb? You can't speak?
Yeah. That would be dumb. That's pretty melodramatic though, dude. How did you lose your tongue?
If I show
it was Pete's latte.
Pete's fucking coughing, man. But I'd be signing it though. I wouldn't be saying it.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. You'd have to write it out.
The upside would be that I would learn to sign, and signing's pretty cool. So I'm actually kind of down with that.
Yeah.
But then I can't do a podcast anymore. So
we'd have to make it a vodcast where I would talk and you would sign.
I guess we could do that. I mean, learning how to do ASL seems extremely difficult when you have to do it with like academic philosophy.
Yeah, real quick, you got to learn "fuck Donald Trump" and sign, and you have to learn "alphabung" and sign. That's your two things.
I'd have to learn like Latin and Greek words and some German and French technical terms. This is going to get really
actually. That's really interesting. I wonder if you are doing ASL because ASL is different than British Sign and it's different than various regional sign languages. I can't remember how it works, but between ASL and then British Sign Language, one of them uses two hands more and the other one uses a singular hand more. So I wonder if you were to do that, you're talking about philosophy in English, but then you're going to use a French word. How do you articulate different accents or different regional tongues? There's got to be a way to do it, right?
I would guess so. You know what? Fuck all this. If I lose my tongue, I'm just going to like quit academics and like become an assassin or something.
Yeah, exactly. Remember when we were in college and we said that if we weren't doing what we wanted to do within a particular amount of time, we would go join like the Zapatistas or some shit like that?
I do remember that.
Whatever happened with that?
What was the qualification? I don't remember.
It was like within 10 years or something.
If we don't what?
If we aren't doing academic research or if we're not doing what we want to be doing. I don't remember what it was exactly, but I'm pretty sure that time is ticking. So we need to make a decision quick.
I'm like a year away from that.
Yeah, and if your tongue is inoperable, you might as well just fucking join, dude.
Oh yeah, dude, I'll be fucked.
Awesome. Yeah, well, I understand.
I'm gonna be like that guy Piss Pig Grantland who went over and joined the Kurdish forces in Syria.
That'd be cool. You could
I'll get killed so fast.
Well, you know what you could do instead? You could just go hang out in, what is it, the Rojava region, which is like a straight up, basically commune society, which is pretty awesome in the north of Syria. So it's not quite as revolutionary or radical, but at least, it's a change of pace. I don't know.
I'm pretty sure I heard like that, although their communes are extremely conservative, morally speaking. So like, if a dude decides to pleasure himself, like you're a dead man.
Oh, that's shitty. Run from that place.
Yeah, I don't know about that, man.
All right. Well, okay. So Pete gets 90%, but you're 10% culpable, dude. Radical freedom. Own that shit.
All right. So for our men's segment today, we are talking about the United Airlines fiasco. Is that the proper term to apply for it?
Dude, it is a fucking fiasco.
So for those who may have been living under a rock, which would actually include both of us, because we were both gone on types of vacation this weekend, right?
Yep.
Neither of us heard about any of this until we got back, but apparently there was a man. Did it turn out, was he a doctor, or was that fake news?
Oh, was that fake news? I still was believing that he was a doctor as of today.
I don't know. Well, it doesn't matter anyway. There were some claims he was a doctor, but he was an elderly Asian man who had boarded United Airlines flights. Obviously, he had bought his ticket, done everything legitimately, and as these major airlines are wont to do, they overbooked the flight and needed to get some people to get off the plane so they could host their employees or something like that. No one volunteered to do it for the modest sum they were offering, and so they basically chose volunteers, which is not what the word volunteer means. I don't think they realized that. But and they decided to reaccommodate this volunteer, which was a great term.
Is that what they said?
Yeah, the CEO, I believe, used the term reaccommodate the passenger, which is a wonderful euphemism. And the video, and of course, one of the other passengers in the plane recorded the video of them beating the shit out of him and dragging him off the plane unconscious and bleeding.
More than just one. There are like 3 or 4 different angles that I've seen of the incident. So
yeah, and people screaming like, "What are you doing? What look what you've done to him!" Just in utter horror at what had happened, and that's obviously a terrible situation. A few people have come out in defense of United, but most everyone has been on every side of the political spectrum has been horrified that this happens.
What were the defenses? What did people say in defense of the airline? What was their justification?
I think there were a few that I saw that had not necessarily written like think pieces or anything, but basically arguing what I think we'll talk about as we get into this, which is that buying a ticket for a plane does not give you a right to unequivocally be on the plane when you want to, and United owns the airplane, and so they get to decide whether or not you're on there. And if they tell you to leave their property, you have to leave, otherwise you're trespassing. And so that is all true. And I actually think that at least those people, as barbaric as they're being morally by defending United, are at least consistent in their logic. Whereas I think a lot of the people who are upset about this don't really have a consistently logical explanation for why what United did was horrible, other than the fact that they obviously have lost a lot of money from it. And it's been a black mark on them.
Although the problem is, under, let's say, a neutral power dynamic, in exchange of money for services or money for a product, does act as a contract. So United violated their end of the contract when the person bought a ticket for that flight and that seat. Now, I'm sure that there's some fine print somewhere on your ticket that says, you know, this is subject to change based on blah, 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 blah. And that's what they would use.
Contract.
Yeah, and that's what they would use to justify it. So if that's the case, then that fucking sucks. But the problem is then what that demonstrates is that there's not a neutral power relation, but there's actually an asymmetrical power relation. And that is another problem that needs to be considered, even from the position of justifying or defending the people who would say that United was in the wrong. Because what they're basically doing is just perpetuating or reproducing the power relation, and that's the problem.
Yeah, it's the scariest thing is that it's fully legal what they're doing.
Right.
Airlines have the right to overbook and then basically forcibly reaccommodate their passengers, meaning use the threat of violence against them, and then not just the threat, but the actual enactment of violence if they need to get their property back.
Now, do they have that latter part? Is that latter part sort of latent within the contract, the use of forcible removal or something like that?
In the same way you do if someone trespasses on your property.
Right, but there wasn't a contractual exchange of money for service when someone's trespassing on your property.
Except the contract itself was that you would need to leave if the airline decided you're not to stay.
Okay.
That's part of the contract. Whereas if someone buys, like, I don't know, comes to your house and they're going to buy something off of Craigslist or whatever, there's like an implicit contract there that they're going to take that. But if you say, actually, no, you don't get to stay anymore, then, and they refuse to leave at that point, then you do have a right to use force.
But they've already taken the guy's money.
Yeah, but I mean, in the contract it says that you can either be refunded, which he was offered and refused, right? That was the point.
So he was offered a refund.
I believe he was offered a certain sum of money above and beyond the refund. Everyone was offered that for volunteers, and everyone refused.
Shit, I would have taken that fucking money, man.
Well, yeah, so would I. But the point is, and this is part of the argument that I wanted to ask you.
Yeah.
I believe it was Justin Wolfers, who's an economist, a really bright and intelligent economist who I read a lot in the New York Times. He mentioned at one point the mistake was in United Airlines not continuing to rise the offer for volunteers, because you have the sort of market here, right, where everyone has a certain value that they have and demand for their flights. At some point, one of the passengers is going to have the monetary sum offered to them be more than their own personal subjective value of the flight and getting to where they want to go on time. And that first passenger will take it. And then you have the fact that there's a competition between all the passengers to take that sum before somebody else does.
Right.
And his point was if United had just continued to raise the price, eventually there would have been no violence necessary whatsoever because someone would have taken it. Even if they had to rise it to, over $1,000 or so. It would have been a lot better than what happened.
Right.
In terms of the share market value United shares and all that kind of stuff. And
their payout
publicity
is going to be a lot more than $1,000. That's for fucking sure.
Yeah, and I mean, just the stock effectiveness on their stock has been so huge that would have been certainly the rational thing to do, given what happened.
Well, and how many people have diverted their travels or have changed their travel plans or just unconsciously decided with purchasing tickets over the last few days that they would not choose United no matter what. I mean, I guarantee there's tens of thousands, if not more, of dollars that were lost.
Oh yeah, of course, and that's certainly true. But my question is, why would they have to do that in the first place? Certainly, it's rational to do in the sense of it would have been better to pay a guy $2,000 and obscene amount to rearrange his flight than to deal with all this. But assuming nobody had recorded this, nothing would have happened. It would have just been some anecdote that some people had. If that had occurred, then why would United have any obligation to pay anybody anything? They're, by contract, allowed to remove anybody they want from the flights. Right. They could have just said, we're not offering you anything. You need to leave. And send the security guards in and drag him out if he refuses to leave because he's trespassing. Yeah. Like, that's obviously horrible. I'm not defending that, of course. Right. That's what's legal. And if no one had recorded it, that probably would have happened, and we wouldn't be talking about it right now. And no one would be talking about it right now.
Right, which makes you think that in the history of business affairs, more often than not, because obviously constant surveillance and recording and whatnot that we have access to now hasn't always been there, makes you think that more often than not, these types of situations have gone unnoticed or have not been publicized. And so there has not been a check on the powers that be, so to speak, as there has been in more recent similar situations. For some reason, a lot of them have to do with flights. I don't know. People are just assholes on removing people from flights, apparently. But yeah. So
it's just like the locus of fascism in America is like the airport.
Yeah, it's fucking true, man. I had a shitty situation on a flight too that was delayed a certain amount of time, and there's a rule in Europe where if you're delayed over 7 hours, I think it is, or 6 hours, you get a full refund on your flight ticket. Well, we were delayed like over 9 hours, and it was just a gnarly situation. And then in trying to deal with the airline, they were completely non-responsive, and they just didn't give a fuck, because they were just like, well, there's nothing you can do about it. Deal with it. Sorry. And that type of attitude seems to permeate all of their actions when it comes to simpler things like mine that obviously don't have any sort of relation to violence, and then some of the more forceful ones where people get removed from flights or where flight attendants get kind of they become assholes to passengers on the flights, or when you see someone like this who gets forcibly removed. That it's interesting is that there is an assumption of power, and it's almost a might makes right kind of situation that makes it so that there are no protections for consumers. But who has the protections is the ones who have protections are the big businesses already. The very persons who don't need the protections are the ones who have all the protections.
Yeah, it's that classic idea that leftists and socialists always talk about, that property is only a concept that has any efficacy and practical value because it's backed up by the threat of violence. And that's contrary to, say, like the libertarian idea that property is a natural right.
Right.
And you can found other principles of value on top of that. Whereas for the kind of the socialist view, this is an illustration of exactly that. There's the only reason this issue of property is here is because the threat of violence was actually used, whereas usually it's just implied. But the sense that it here was used warns everybody else. Is anybody gonna necessarily refuse to accommodate when someone comes to remove them from the flight? Right. I mean, they might be hoping for a payout and then try and be a dick about it, but they're probably going to ruin their chances at that payout by being a dick about it.
Now, who removed him? Because it looked like a couple of the gentlemen were badged officers.
I think it was like Chicago PD or something.
Okay, so now here's the thing. This is again what's interesting. Now, this is kind of what you're saying, but it isn't just that it was like some people from United representatives, their own internal private security guards went in. We're talking about publicly funded organizations and structures were the ones that went in and enforced the power structure or the asymmetrical power relation, that power dynamic, by removing the consumer and siding with the capitalist. So what you get then is you get the complete, let's say, destruction of that myth, that libertarian myth, that property is an individual right and that there is a sort of neutral, non-ethical playing field under which this acquisition of property takes place, rather than what in point of fact actually does happen is that you get state power, or you get concentrated centralized power that is what bestows its blessing upon various segments or actors within the market. And then obviously those are the ones who are the capitalists, right? And the consumers aren't the ones that get it. And so what it ends up being is you basically just get this might makes right type of logic where I own this property, the state will protect my rights over this property, and that is right simply because I have the ability to enforce it and the state will protect that. And so just simply because I have ownership and I claim ownership over it and I have the strength now and the power to defend that ownership, that makes it right. And therefore legality is identified with right, which is identified with power. And it's not even implicit, it's explicit. It's literally might makes right. It's not like, oh, it could be. That's exactly what it is.
Yeah, which is exactly why the kind of structuralist critique that socialists make about this is, if that's the case, then we just have to sort of usurp that power.
Yeah, the expropriation of the expropriators.
Exactly, right, as being the only real means for ameliorating that. Now, let me ask you this. Mm-hmm. The non-aggression principle, it's the kind of the founding principle of libertarian philosophical thinking, right? The non-aggression principle says that you basically can found all personal and societal values on being non-aggressive. And that goes back to being interpreted, in this case, about property claims, right? Not taking anybody else's property without their consent, so on and so forth. And this is why libertarians tend to reject things like taxation, and really hardcore libertarians.
Taxation is theft. Yeah.
Taxation would be theft because you're taking someone's property without their consent.
Right.
And that's why, was it Nozick that talks about taxation as being slavery, mm-hmm. or a form of slavery for that very reason? And he makes the analogy between somebody having their labor power taken away without their consent, that's literal slavery, and having your wages taken without your consent is just another form of that, since you're using your labor power to produce those wages. So this non-aggression principle, who in this situation were United and the cops and this individual person refused to leave the flight that he had paid for legitimately, who is being aggressive? Who is the aggressor in this situation?
Well, I guess from in a sense they all are, right? Because there's always going to be an act of violence whenever you impose any sort of force on another person. Like if everything is just a swirling field of power, actively and reactively bouncing off one another, or bouncing off of various other types of nodes of power, let's say within this network, then you're going to constantly get a field of violence, right? Which is why I think the non-aggression principle is ridiculous, because it assumes that there is a neutral sort of originary starting point, right? An ontology of peace, so to speak, is what it assumes, which I think is ridiculous, because really what you get is you have an ontology of power and asymmetrical power at varying different levels and at varying different intensities. So the police officers or the police force, their possession and expression of power is different than the man, the consumer, which is also different than the airline, which is different than the flight attendants, which is different than the passengers. But all of them are brought into this network of situation where they're all exerting some type of power on each other and on the various kind of the situation itself, which you might call like the networked situation, right? So the man, by refusing to simply accept that he must get off based on the contractual obligation that he has entered into, he is in some ways being aggressive because he is violating that contract. However, with that said, it also seems to be the case that the contract itself is an imposition of violence because it's the imposition and the legal justification of violence and of power over consumers, justifying an asymmetrical power relation. Likewise, the police officers who were there justifying and supporting the contract and then, of course, engaging in the actual extraction itself are also engaging in violence. So what you get are just varying different intensities or variations of violence. And so then that's the problem, is then what that does is it confounds the whole non-aggression principle. It rejects this idea of an ontology of peace in the first place, which we need to fucking discard. Get rid of the non-aggression principle because it's bullshit. And we need to look at it within a different lens. And that makes it a very complex situation.
Yeah, that was way more complex than I was looking for in that question. But
Well,
I think that's all correct. I mean, just in this, when you come across libertarians and they talk about the non-aggression principle, do you think that they think of it as being basically a non-violence principle?
I do. No, I don't actually. Because we tend to think of violence as being some sort of physical or maybe extreme emotional harm, right? But I don't think that they think of it like that. Ultimately, I mean, maybe the average dude walking down the street does, right? But I think philosophers, libertarian philosophers, or kind of right anarchist philosophers, I think they're aware that it runs a little bit deeper.
Yeah, but I also feel like most of the libertarian philosophers don't hold to the non-aggression principle when it really gets down to it.
Yeah,
they'll kind of ditch it because they realize it's actually about property and not about violence.
Right.
But I seem when I come across most regular Joe Blow thinking person type, the Reddit libertarian or whatever, who's intelligent and thinks about this stuff and wants to have a consistent worldview, they normally couch it as this is sort of like the way I live my life. Like, I follow non-aggression principle.
Like, I'm a pacifist.
I think that the society should do it too. Like, I don't mess with the people; they don't mess with me. And you do you, and I do me, and everyone else should live that way too. And we should use that on the international scene as well. And that seems to be kind of their guiding moral principle, which I totally get.
But it's not just violence, because it also means like, don't take my jacket from me, which could be a form of violence. But I mean, I think we think of it as like physical harm or some sort of emotional harm, and they would extend it to like, don't take my stuff from me, don't step on my property if you haven't been invited, don't demand services from me that like in an unreasonable way. Like, all of that, that is all violence. I think that is actually a way of talking about violence. But I think that is more what they think of with non-aggression. So I think it's bigger than just the word violence, at least as we understand violence in common parlance. Yeah,
certainly. I mean, the idea that violence is only physical, I think, is pretty easy to reject, even in a literal sense, without getting figurative. But we don't have to go down that road.
Okay, yeah.
And that when most libertarians talk about the non-aggression principle as being kind of this non-violence, but also non-interaction without consent,
yes,
type of relationship, then you ask yourself, who is being aggressive in this instance? On the face of it, 99% of everyone who saw this incident has said United was in the wrong. They're the aggressor. They're the one who has done the wrong thing. They've been overly aggressive in a way that should not be legal, if it is. Whereas technically, from the libertarian view, based on what the non-aggression principle actually says, because it's based upon property rights and contracts, isn't the passenger the one who was violent, who was aggressive?
Yeah.
He's the aggressor.
This is what is so powerful about what you're saying. Under the conditions of liberal capitalism, they were entirely in their right and he was in the wrong. But we look at that and we know that's not right. We know that what is right, quote unquote, is not right. And I think what that indicates is that there's a deeper sense that we can intuit, and that people just know that that's not fair or that's not right. But what they're doing when they say that is they're appealing to a higher ethical plane than the sort of conditions that liberal capitalism imposes or expects or demands. And there's something powerful in that, because that's the spark of life. That's that revolutionary spark of life that I've talked about, that I think you find in the Critique of Dialectical Reason, that is that apocalyptic moment that breaks open the serial conditions that you might not even know about, but that's there all the time. And we need to just figure out a way to stoke those flames and then kind of get that fire burning a little more, because people feel it. I mean, look at every single person on the plane that's in that video. Not a single one of them was, I mean, of course, I'm not saying there weren't any people who wouldn't have sided with the airline and been like, dude, just get the fuck up. But every single person that you see in the video, like you said, is screaming like, what are you doing? Look at his face. He's bleeding. Jesus, just calm down. Every single person intuits that they were in the wrong, quote unquote. But technically speaking, they're kind of within their rights. So that's what's all fucked up about it.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. And that this was even though it's such a minor issue, and I don't want to like blow it up proportion and be like, oh my God, it's the new Rosa Parks. We're going to have like a civil rights movement to go on top of this. And it has a similar illustrative capacity. I feel like in that, in the way Rosa Parks, as a parallel, it wasn't necessarily like the moment where everything set off, but it had such a symbolic efficacy. Because it was clear that this imposition and Jim Crow was going to use violence in the same way it did with the sort of sit-ins at diners and stuff like that. That stuff led to these symbolic moments that made it clear to everybody what was actually going on here. That Jim Crow wasn't just best for everybody, but is in fact backed up by the threat of violence of the state. And that it was naked and clear that was the case. It was no longer hidden. And this is now an event that's much, much smaller scale, but similarly, it makes naked that property relations are not natural, but are in fact backed up by the force of violence of the state. And that's always the case. I mean, the very reason why you don't do things that are sort of illegal, even though they might not be immoral, is because of that threat of violence, which actually happened to this one person, could very well happen to you if you do the same.
Now, so I've been reading David Graeber's Debt, The First 5,000 Years, and apart from it being interminably long and him just talking about how basically all of these cultures, just really what debt boils down to is them like swapping wives and daughters and things like that for, I don't know, like 400 pages. It seems like that's what he's doing. Apart from that, it's a great book. And one of the things that he talks about is how in our familial relations, we aren't capitalists. We're communists. When you're sitting at a table and you say, "Wait, can you pass the salt?" You don't say, "Sure, that's 50 cents," or "You owe me now because I've passed the salt." Even though we use the language of thank you and please and all of these other things that do sort of imply these debt relations that he unpacks, the thing that's interesting is he talks about how, in our daily lives, when you talk about doing something for your friends, like, sure, there might be a sense of obligation, like if somebody lets you borrow their pickup truck to go move some furniture or something like that, that there is a sense of like, hey, I owe you one. Maybe. But the thing that was so interesting, that was striking to me, is that it was almost as though what he was saying is that we aren't communists. I'm sorry, we aren't capitalists, but rather we're communists in our social ties, in our close social ties with our friends and our family. But nevertheless, we're capitalists so that we can become communists. So we work and we engage in the system of capitalist relations, and we sell our labor and we compete with other wage laborers on the market so that we can come home and then just play ball with our kids. Or so that we can come home and just make love with our partners. Or so that we can come home and just read a book with our sick kid. Or something like that. So it's almost like you're capitalists so that you can become communists. And this kind of seems to hit at something similar, which is that the impulse is communal. The impulse is for reciprocal social relations. That's what the impulse is for. Maybe this is the species being that Marx talks about, right? Maybe that's that impulse that seems to be there. But nevertheless, it's so clouded under the conditions of capitalism that seep into the very ways that we think, act, and feel, that it's very difficult for us to scrape beneath that level, except every once in a while, it sparks up. And a kid falls in the pool, you just jump in after the kid regardless of your life so that you can rescue the kid. Or if a car accident happens on the side of the road, you just fucking pull over and you help that person. Not because you're trying to engage in some sort of exchange mechanism, but rather you just simply empathically function as a fucking decent human. And that seems to indicate there's this conflictual level. There's this conflictual, what is it? There are these conflictual domains of sociality that are fighting. One, the conditions of capitalism, and one, the conditions of a different form of reciprocal social relations, which some people would call communism, whatever it is you want to call it, communalism, mutuality, cooperativism, something along those lines. And this plain instance seems to indicate that that species being is alive and well.
Okay, this brings up a really interesting question. I feel like I'm hearing a lot of conservatives, especially of this kind of on the alt-right variety, talk about that as being 100% true. And they believe that is the case. We have these kind of intuitive communitarian leanings, but then we, on large-scale issues, we forms of economy, for instance, we have to act capitalistically to arrange resources properly. And their argument tends to be that the reason why, say, Nordic countries do really well in terms of having more communitarian and collectivist type policies is because they do see the other people in their society as being of this familial bond, because they're of the similar race, religion, ethnicity, whatever it is.
That's right.
And so you can have that communal bond with them. And if we want to have that, we would then just have to recreate those conditions of ethnicity and race and religion and basically kick everybody else out who's not like us and make a white ethno-nationalist state, right. Where we could then have all the good things like single-payer healthcare and collectivist type, almost pseudo-communist type policies for the betterment of everybody. That's similar to us. I think even Richard Spencer has said he's a fan of single-payer.
He is. No, Richard Spencer, like everything that you're saying, he's literally said that. He has said that. Like they're socialists. Those fucking dudes that are a part of whatever his crew, what is his crew called again? His think tank?
Oh, the Policy Institute.
National Policy Institute, or whatever it's called. Yeah. No, they at their meetings, they have literally said that they're fans of socialist, like economic and social principles, but just like with like. So white people taking care of white people, and the black people, they're cool. Like, we don't want to get rid of them from the planet. We just don't want them in our community.
We just can't have nice things if they're involved.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right.
Yeah, and so I think that they would be sort of sympathetic to some of this argument and just say, yeah, but the condition for having that in the first place is some type of racial, ethnic, religious, ideological bond. You couldn't have a melting pot of difference and have that same impulsive collectivist type mentality.
Yeah, which I think is just not true, because there are many people who do exhibit that type of collectivist instinctual intuition, right? They do have that. They have embodied that. It's become part of their habitus. So for one, I think obviously that would be just an anecdotal response. But I think beyond that, their biggest problem is what they're doing is they're establishing certain identities or certain zones of selfness that are constructs that they believe are essential, but that aren't. So they say, well, it's based on European descent. Well, what the fuck is European descent? Like, go back 1,000 years and all of that gets muddied. Are you talking about Normans? Are you talking about the Vikings? Are you talking about the Gaels? What the fuck is European? Just because you have fairer skin? Well, that doesn't fucking mean anything, because in Ireland right now, I can tell you there is still this weird sort of tension between the Norman Gaels and then the Gaels, and then you've got the Viking Norms and then the Viking Gaels and the Viking Norm Gaels, and all of them have these various heritages. So what identity are you going to cling to that is going to be your source of selfhood that then conditions or justifies these things that you're talking about? And so that's why the sort of alt-right neo-nationalist bullshit is just completely ridiculous, because they don't realize the imagined communities that they are imbibing, or they're embodying, but rather they think they're getting to some sort of essence, but they're not. They're not at all.
Yeah, there is no European identity until like the last 100 years.
Right.
So,
and even that,
people don't see themselves as being European until you have things to contrast that with, like East Asian or African or Arabic.
The term used to be Oriental, right? The term used to be Oriental.
Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. That's just anything bad from the East, right?
That identity only becomes constructed when it has a contrasting notion to be against.
Right.
A friend-enemy distinction.
Here's the problem, though, too, man. Like, I get on better with certain people of non-European descent because of different identity markers. that unite us, or different sources of selfhood that unite us. So if there were a fucking East Asian mixed with Latin American mixed with Nigerian Marxist who studied, I don't know, we'll say late French continental philosophy and traveled the world, never stepped foot in America, never stepped foot in a church, was on a plant-based diet, and really enjoyed college basketball. He and I would get along better than some fucking hardcore evangelical Christian, I don't know, Chicago Bulls fan, you know, who was white as white can be and of German heritage like me and my family. There are different sources of selfhood that unite us. And so these identity communities, these spheres of identity themselves are also so complex. And that's, I don't know, it's just that they are valorizing certain identities in order to justify a hatred or an anger. And that's really what it is. It seems like a way of self-justifying your own presuppositional biases towards people groups. And that's why that argument doesn't hold, because then they're ignorant of those biases and they're ignorant of the sort of essentialism that they're trying to proffer, that itself is not an essentialism. It's just a construct.
Yeah, exactly, man. I feel like I would have more in common in terms of values with, you know, a Nepalese Theravada Buddhist monk
Yeah.
than with somebody who has a Confederate flag on the back of his car in, you know, Alabama or whatever.
Or even if he's
who, like,
even if he's from North Los Angeles.
Yeah, but I'd rather talk to a guy who lives in South Central and is going to listen to that new Kendrick album and talk all about it for like a week, than somebody who's listening to like Faith Hill or some shit. Like, I'm going to have like nothing in common with this person in terms of values whatsoever. And that's fine. Like, I don't disparage those people at all. It just means these things are all constructs. Identities are all constructs. And they might be some older than others, but they're still constructs. And that's a great thing, because that means if we want to have some sort of bond necessary for having a collectivist or a communitarian type of identity that's necessary for these kind of better policies to be enacted and in a better society to be formed, that means we actually can do it. We just have to construct those identities with that purpose in mind and try to convince people and persuade them towards that. Right. It's work, and we can't get it tomorrow, but it means it's a thing we can actually do.
Yeah. Yeah. And as interesting as it sounds, this, like you said, this isn't a Rosa Parks moment per se, but there's definitely a similar logic, because you also get an Asian man who I don't know, was he Asian American, or was he, because his English from the video that I saw when he's kind of in shock afterwards saying, I need to get home, I need to get home, I need to get home. It sounded pretty broken. So I would imagine that he's not I would imagine he's an English as a second language speaker. So it's interesting to note then how there is this almost consensus support on his side that seems to throw a wrench in that white nationalist or neo-nationalist logic, because there are so many people who are empathically and collectively, you know, kind of supporting this guy and coming around this guy, even in the face of maybe their own sort of illogical or inconsistent way of thinking about the logic of capitalism and misunderstanding the contractual obligations of consumer and capitalist and shit like that. But that's what's interesting, is that they are able to connect with this random Asian dude that they don't even fucking know, but they just see somebody in pain. And then that sparks something within them. And I know we talk about it all the time, but it almost seems that we don't talk about empathy enough. I know you and I talk about it a bit, but human beings together, like, we don't use it enough in political theory. We don't use it enough in social theory. We don't talk about it enough when we're actually engaging in political debate, that, no, we need to empathize with people and feel people and connect with them and embrace them and touch them at that deep sort of connective level that we're pretty much soft-wired to do. I don't want to say hardwired, but we're definitely soft-wired for it. And it's powerful to be able to kind of let that occur.
I don't want to fucking touch people, man. No one better fucking touch
me. I want to touch you, Troy. I'm a touch you. Hey, real quick.
Have you ever...
Well, go ahead.
Have you ever read that book? I think it's Paul Bloom wrote Against Empathy.
No, you were talking about it though. But it has to do with like too much empathy, right?
Yeah, it'd be interesting to like read some of that and talk about some of the arguments, given your insistence on this. And I agree with you, but I feel some reticence at the idea. So I think it'll be interesting sometime to do that.
Let's do it. Okay. Yeah, we'll definitely do it.
Put on the docket for sometime in the future.
Yeah, I would love to, actually. That would be a really fun episode to do. Okay, but before we close out, I do want to say something. So I've been reading that book by Raul Martinez that I talked about a couple weeks ago. And you know, I don't agree with him on so many things. He's very, I would say he errs to the side of biological determinism a little bit. But, you know, there's some other great things that he says that I think are really valuable. And one of the things that he was talking about was about how kind of ridiculous it is that we just accept that a small collective of people are eligible to claim ownership over the Earth's resources. And when he said that, it caused me to pause for a minute and say, wow. And I was actually talking about this with Kira. It was when we were on holiday. I was reading it for a minute, and I was just sitting there in the hotel room. And I said, you know, the concept of the commons is something that we don't hear about too often. I know Michael Hart and Antonio Negri talked about it quite a bit in some of their works. But the idea of the commons isn't something that we hear people talk about too often, except in Marxist circles. But even then, it doesn't seem that just that idea is used as a powerful motif, whereas for me, it seems to have great power. Because why is it that we just simply are cool with the fact that a small minority of people are given ownership over something that ought to be common to all? The resources of water, for example, is something that certain people own the water supply. What the fuck is that? That is literally the essence of life. That makes no sense to me. That ought to be common. But even the land that yeah, but even the land that my house is built on right now, like, why is it that someone claims ownership over it? Now, I'm not saying there can't be individual property. There ought to be individual property. There is. I mean, every time I take a step, that's in a sense a practical claim over the property that my foot is on, and I'm cool with the fact of not needing to feel like I'm constantly threatened from people pushing me off of my ground so that they can take the land upon which I'm standing just because everything's common. But that wouldn't be obviously how opening up the commons would work, because that still assumes a sort of competitive capitalist or a competitive sort of a violent motif, which we kind of want to move away from. But it's this idea of kind of respecting the commons, or using the commons as a concept, or as an idea, as an image that seems to have import to me, to make me think about the world and how it is that we function, and how we allocate resources, and how we claim resources, and how we use resources. That I don't know. It just seems like a powerful idea that I want to ponder more. I want to let it seep in a little bit more, you know?
Yeah, we could do an episode on the tragedy of the commons too. That'd be a fun one to talk about.
Look at this. We're just loading up all kinds of episodes we're foreshadowing. Listeners, foreshadowing. We'll do one against empathy and one on the tragedy of the commons, or the beauty of the commons. It'll be both. Both and.
What happens when you have a tragedy that turns into its opposite? That's just a comedy then? And the classical dualism there?
Yeah, it kind of is, huh? I don't know.
The comedy of the commons. It's at least alliterative.
The tragicomedy of the commons.
The tragicomedy of the commons. The what's the dude who produces all the Seth Rogen films?
Judd Apatow?
The Judd Apatow movie of the commons.
Have you been watching Love, by the way?
The worst fucking form of socialism ever.
Did we already have this conversation? Did you watch Love?
Yeah. I mean, I saw the first episode, but I wasn't into it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. All right. Yeah, well, I mean, is there anything else you want to say about this incident, or about sort of libertarian logic that seems to have been confounded by the outcry and support of this man who was abused?
Yeah, fuck airports.
With that said, I still feel like a little boy when I'm at the airport and I see those big, huge machines come up with their jet engines, and they're so fucking cool, man.
The worst, man. Giant death tubes.
They are. Do you hate flying?
Oh, well, I don't hate it, but it sucks big time.
They are giant death tubes. Do you become really Christian every time you get onto a flight?
No, I'm a full-on nihilist, dude. I'm like, I'm gonna fucking die anyway. I might as well be here.
I'm not gonna lie. I start making deals with Jesus a little bit.
Alright, for our next segment then is the Sticky Leaves. This is where one of us talks about whatever is bringing us meaning in a meaningless universe. When you're on a flight and it's barreling towards the Earth, about to meet your end and your destruction, Austin, what brings you meaning in those final seconds?
Well, I'm not...
Fiery doom.
When you put it like that, it makes me want to change my Sticky Leaves, because I'm not sure this gives me that much meaning. But actually, so my Sticky Leaves is really rather simple, and it's kind of nostalgic, but... This past weekend, let's say for the past week. So obviously, we had Isaiah on last week and we talked about the documentary that we're developing. And so my workload over the past couple weeks has been, I'm probably busier than I've ever been in my entire life with just all kinds of things that I've got going on. And I always in my office listen to music. And for the past few months, I've been up to my eyeballs in hip-hop. Obviously, we've got Michael, who's given us recommendations every week, and just in general, I've kind of been really interested in hip-hop for the last couple of years, more so than what was my first love, which is, pop, punk, skate, punk, shit like that, post-punk, hardcore, screamo kind of shit. Yeah, OC shit, right? But last week, I was doing some really just... banal admin shit for the documentary. I'm talking about emailing hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people. I mean, I don't even know how many people I've emailed over the last week, but I guarantee you it's near 1,000 now, right? So, and a lot of it is press releases and things. And so it's not always thought-provoking emails that but it's a lot of it's copy and paste, change the address, change the addressee, that kind of shit, right? And so I get into a groove and I'm blasting music. Well, the hip-hop music just wasn't doing it for me for whatever reason. So I went onto my Apple iTunes and I just typed in the word punk and I went onto the punk music station. And, dude, it was like Operation Ivy and then No Effects and then Pennywise and then fucking Misfits came on. And I was like, this is amazing. And then... on Saturday night, I was in Glasgow, Scotland, for one of my really good buddies, who's also a film director that I've worked with quite a bit. But his old band from back in the day, which was a Misfits cover band, they're all Scottish, so they call themselves Mickfits. They arranged a reunion night that was called Strictly Come Danzig. And I went to this show, and it was all early Danzig, all pre... mid 80s. So before the 80s when Danzig left and shit like that. So it was all early Danzig shit. And, they were all dressed up in the fucking horror gear. And he's got a skeleton on his mic stand and they're squirting blood in the audience. And, they've got the fucking devil locks and shit like that. And bro, it was fucking amazing. I haven't been to a punk show in 10 years. Maybe not 10 years, but 7 or 8 years. Oh, because I saw Lagwagon and what were they called? The Swingin' Utters and Lagwagon in Orange County, maybe 5 years ago or 4 years ago or something like that. But I haven't really been to a punk show where I've been in a pit in years. And I got in this fucking punk pit, and it was legit. It was so much fun, man. And it was just kind of that. I've really enjoyed listening to this shitty kind of punk music, rock music, hardcore music for the past little while. Oh, and then after the concert, we all went to this club in Glasgow called the Cat House that is basically a hard rock metal punk club where they were playing shit everything from Linkin Park to Nine Inch Nails to bands that I'd never even fucking heard of to Avenged Sevenfold. I mean, stuff that maybe I was never even really into, but late 90s, early 2000s, just metal, industrial, post-punk kind of shit. And I don't know, man, it kind of like rejuvenated me, and it was nice. Now, I don't want to listen to it all the time, but it was lovely, man. I had such a great time listening to it. So that's my sticky leaves. I just enjoy kind of that old skate punk, pop punk, post-punk, hardcore, screamo shit so much. It's got a place in my heart. So that's my sticky leaves this week. That stuff's awesome. And if you're into it, listen to it. If you're not into it, fuck it. But whatever you're into now, go back and just give yourself a few days of like nostalgic stuff that you used to vibe with when you were in like your late high school years. So it'll bring a smile on your face for sure.
It does, right? All that stuff you listen to in high school brings back great memories. You can't even like judge it properly. Right? Like you listen to it, I'm unable to listen to music I listened to back then and think anything negative of it, even if I can kind of intellectually figure out why that's the case. You know?
Yeah.
It's exactly the same thing.
Yeah, and then when you listen to the lyrics, well, a lot of the lyrics, especially in the pop punk and screamo and emo shit, it's so bad. The lyrics are sometimes so cheesy, and you just want to be like, bro, get over yourself. Don't worry. It's not the end of the world. Just because she didn't give you the rose, it's not the end of the world, dude.
That's why you got to go back to old school punk, man. In the 80s and the hardcore, do some Minor Threat, some Dead Kennedys. I listened to a podcast earlier, and I guess there was some ridiculous scenario where someone in the 80s had basically taken some audio from Ronald Reagan and Maggie Thatcher and spliced it so it sounded like they were doing some illegal deal together with some foreign nation. I don't remember what it was. It was like an Iran-Contra type thing. But it was totally faked, and it caused this huge uproar. And then apparently it was Crass, the hardcore punk band from the 80s, that had compiled it on a record.
No shit.
Yeah, and like it got released somehow independently, and people thought it was real in this whole deal. Which is just like, American punk is the only thing that could actually make a thing like that happen, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard?
No, I know of Crass, but I've never actually listened to him.
Oh, Crass is great.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard the guy Jeffrey Lewis, his song "The History of Punk on the Lower East Side"?
God, that sounds so familiar.
I'll send it to you, but if you're out there listening, it's a great... Jeffrey Lewis is kind of he's a anti-folk guy.
Okay.
Anti-folk is like, it's folk style with like acoustic guitar, but it's usually punk rockish and anti-pop and the whole thing.
Yeah.
And usually anarchist. And he has a song called "The History of Punk Rock on the Lower East Side," something like that, where he just tells the entire story of how punk was created in America in the late 60s and early 70s. And then the end of the song, which is a spoiler, but it's kind of funny, is that then the Sex Pistols went on TV and stole the whole thing. So like punk rock existed for 10 years in the underground in America. But then the second the Sex Pistols went on TV, all of a sudden punk was English. It fucking wasn't. America owns punk like we own jazz.
Whoever says America doesn't own jazz?
No, I mean, everyone says we own jazz. We also own punk just like we own jazz.
See, I did not know that. I kind of thought that because when you listen to a lot of documentaries on punk, they talk about how it was a very British phenomenon.
Nah, metal was British. I'll give that to the English. That's a middle class, lower middle class, working class English thing. Punk is America.
Interesting. Well, Johnny Rotten's a douchebag anyway, if you've heard him recently in some of the comments he's made. So, yeah, that's fine.
And the Sex Pistols kind of sucked anyway. Like, give me the Clash any day over the Sex Pistols if you want to talk about English punk.
Yeah. Yeah, see, I mean, growing up for me, I think we've talked about this before, but it wasn't really the hardcore punk that was ever my thing. Like, I can go back now and I can appreciate Minor Threat. And I like, X and Germs and Suicidal Tendencies, and I like Dead Kennedys. But for me, it was much more of that. It was that skate punk scene. It was the X Games, the X Games and
Hawk Pro Skater.
Yeah, and Warped Tour. So it's NoFX, Vandals, Lagwagon, the Pharmaceutical Bandits, I mean, Operation Ivy, I guess, is a little bit kind of on the older side, but bands like Strung Out. And then it turned more into, you got like that influx of like the Blink-182s and Yellow Cards and Newfound Glories, and all that shit kind of was in there too. So Assorted Jelly Beans was a band I was into for a long time. Pulley. God, this is making me so happy. even thinking about these bands. But so I never really got into the hardcore punk because even the hardcore punk that I did get into, like Anti-Flag and stuff, is still kind of post, and it's got a melodic bit to it. So it's different than
very 90s, yeah.
Very 90s, yeah.
But you like Bad Religion, right? Bad Religion
fucking love
is the
Bad
band
Religion.
that crossed the 80s hardcore with the 90s pop punk style.
Yeah, I love Bad Religion. So, yeah, that makes sense.
Dude, we should just make Owls at Dawn a music podcast. Fuck it.
Okay. We've changed now.
Next week, black metal.
Which I know nothing about. Nothing at all.
Okay, never mind.
Yeah. All right, sweet. So now we're going to go into our bullshitting segment where we talk about either something that we don't really know much about or something that doesn't really matter. This week, we're going to be talking about Passover, which we might know something about, but I think in a weird way, because we studied Bible and we studied theology, and, there's a way that Christianity talks about Passover, but it's not quite the same as maybe in an Orthodox Jewish household. So, Troy, what did you want to talk about with regards to the Passover?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of weird that I feel like both of us would probably know a lot more about biblical Judaism than about like a modern practiced Judaism in America.
Exactly.
So if we met someone who was Jewish next door, we would tell them probably more about biblical Second Temple Judaism than they ever wanted to know.
Yeah.
But would have no idea what they're doing.
Yeah, but they'd tell you more about a Seder than I would. I'd be like, what the fuck is a Seder?
Yeah, I've never been to a Seder.
Yeah,
I really want to go to one.
Yo, so when I was, I must have been 12 or 13, and my dad had converted to Christianity, and we started going to like a Calvary chapel. He made friends with a bunch of, I can't remember what they were called. What are they called? Were they called Messianic Jews?
Messianic Jews.
Yeah, so they were Messianic Jews, so they still celebrate all the traditional Jewish holidays. They just believe that Jesus is the Messiah. So we actually went to a Seder, and it was really fucking interesting. I don't really remember much because, like I said, I was either a preteen or an early teen. But, you do stuff where you, like, put the bread in the basket and you cover it over and then you put it somewhere and then it, like, goes away and then the bread's gone or something like that. And then there's, like, salt water and there are all these various different elements that you either consume or you sprinkle or some fucking shit. I don't really remember. But it was really interesting. And so that's the only kind of experience that I've had properly with a Seder. And even that, I'm sure if I were talking with an Orthodox or conservative Jew, they'd be like, they fucked it up.
Yeah, man, I think the whole festival type thing, holiday, is super cool. I guess we came from more of a brick and mortar church looks like an office building type evangelicalism. And so when you're religious but you don't have any of that tradition or that symbolic stuff, doesn't engage all of your senses, like say Eastern Orthodox Christianity does, or sometimes Catholicism does. You kind of have a hankering for that stuff, and you kind of like it. So it appeals to me in the way that I bet those who grew up having to have a Seder every year that lasts 4 hours, 5 hours, and they have to recite like what they call them, the Haggadahs, the Exodus stories. And stuff, then they probably hate it and eat everything that tastes awful except for matzo ball soup.
You know what? I bet you they hate it now, but if they stopped doing it for, say, 15 or 20 years, I bet you there would be a sense in which they would long for it. Not all. I'm generalizing, of course, but where many would long for that connection again to the deep roots, because there is something powerful in that. You know what I mean? Like you were just talking about the Eastern Orthodox tradition that has it. Which, by the way, did you hear that Hank Hanegraaff was recently converted to the Eastern Orthodox Church, and people were
no way.
Yeah, either Eastern Orthodox or Greek Orthodox. I can't remember what, but people were flipping the fuck out in Christian social media land.
I haven't heard that name in forever,
Yeah.
man.
For those of you that are listening and don't know, his name was Hank Hanegraaff, and he was called the Bible Answer Man. And he was one of the evangelical superheroes in, let's say, the mid to late 90s. And yeah, he's recently converted hardcore to either an Eastern Orthodox or Greek Orthodox or something like that. But there's something that's interesting in that, because we had a friend in undergrad named Dave, who was very interested in high church stuff and in tradition. David G. I don't know. Do I want to?
Dave G?
Yeah. Can are we allowed to say names on the book? You don't. Yeah, whatever. You know who you know who I'm talking about.
Yeah, I know you're talking about.
Okay. And he, we came from an evangelical background, but as he began to study more, he got really into high church stuff. And I think there was something powerful about the traditions and the history that kind of fleshed out some of the ahistoricism of evangelicalism. And I think that's one of the reasons that I've been so refreshed by being over in Europe that I have, is because I've been able to connect with people who have history and that have roots and that have this understanding of tradition. And there is something beautiful about it when as silly as it might sound, Irish families on a Sunday, they all do a Sunday roast. And they pick up their grandparents, and if the kids are nearby, then the kids come over to the house, and the cousins, and whoever it is, they always do this. It's just a thing. Every Irish family I've ever known does a Sunday roast, Now, when the kids grow up and they move on, maybe they're not there, but they're probably doing their own Sunday roast. And when they're back in town, they all do the Sunday roast. And there's something liturgical about that in a non-explicitly religious sense that I think is lovely, that you get with the Passover and that you get with these various other religious holidays that Judaism has maintained.
You know what the extent of my liturgical practice is?
You watch basketball on certain days?
Yeah. Watching the Lakers on Christmas. That's probably it.
Watching the Lakers. Yeah, because your family, you all get together and do that.
Yeah, exactly. But no, I agree that I also was drawn at a certain point in time towards Eastern Orthodox theology and practice as mostly for its kind of communal sensibility in a way that I thought evangelicalism really lacked with its individualistic emphasis on personal salvation, that whole thing. But yeah, I mean that drew me in similar ways. It's cool. I dig it.
Yeah, for me it was Presbyterianism.
Really? Why?
Just because of some high church stuff that I never got, but at the same time they were still Reformed. So, they were still it was like PCUSA, which are, they're like liberal and shit like that. So they're cool to have like women bishops, and they're cool with homosexuality, and they're very sort of open and affirming in a lot of their ways, but at the same time they're still kind of like Sola Dea Gloria shit. So for a while that was vibing with me. So there's a church in LA called Bel Air Presbyterian that I was a part of for a little while.
Weren't the Dutch Calvinists pretty high church for Reformed?
Yeah, but the problem is because my experience of Reformed theology was our church that we were a part of for a little bit, Grace, and Baptists. Baptist, and then my dad's church, which is a Reformed Baptist church that holds to the 1689 Confession. So it's Reformed, but it's not high church. I mean, so much is it not high church that they don't even have like fucking crosses in their churches because they, think that that's, like idols and shit. So, yeah.
Damn, Christians are fucking weird, man.
Yeah. Yeah. I know.
I mean, it's not a bad thing, but...
No, it's not the best thing.
Yeah, it's interesting.
If you could convert to any religion now, older in life, like you had to, of the major world religions, like don't tell me like Jainism or some shit like that, of let's say the major 4 or 5, even though Jainism is actually one of the major world religions, because I think it's like it's in like the top 10. But let's say the top like 5. You got the monotheistic religions, and then like Buddhism or Hinduism.
That's a tough one, man. I think probably, man, if I had to choose, it would either be like the most attractive to me in terms of practice and the whole thing that I would feel most at home with. It'd probably have to be like, I would say Judaism, but it wouldn't be Reform because they're too lax. Like, what would be the point?
Yeah,
converting from nothing to that. But I ain't gonna do Orthodox and do all that shit, man. No way.
You don't want to be a Hasidic
No,
Jew?
I'm not gonna be a Hasidic, man. I am messing with like my garb and stuff. No way.
Yeah.
But also, I mean, it'd be stereotypical to say like, you know, be a Theravada Buddhist monk or something. But that'd be pretty awesome if I had to.
Yeah. Yeah, that's kind of how I think
about
too.
you?
Yeah, either Buddhism or Hinduism, and because I still feel like I have a lot of, I mean, obviously just from a distance when I've studied world religions and whatnot, but there's something beautiful about Eastern philosophy that I find very attractive. That I think actually fits in with a lot of my philosophical like Deleuzian stuff. So I think that would fit really well with my sensibility.
Yeah. Plus, also, dude, if you're gonna convert like to religion in general, you might as well go all the way and do the hard thing. Like, don't just half-ass it. What's the point? This is hypothetical, half-assing it.
Right.
And so I'd rather half-ass being a Buddhist monk than being a Hasidic Jew.
Yeah.
If we're gonna have alternatives here.
Well, I mean, I do a lot of Kundalini yoga when I'm in LA, so I guess I'm already on the way of being Hindu.
I don't think that counts, man.
That doesn't count for me being Hindu? Oh. Oh, never mind then. Oh.
All right, so we throw it to Michael?
Yeah, let's throw it to Michael this week. Now, is there some news this week? I heard that an album was supposed to drop, and then it didn't drop.
Yeah, it didn't drop, but I did hear a little birdie said that Bono is going to be on Kendrick's new album. And I'm wondering if Michael's going to be alive to do This Week in Hip Hop, or if he'll have jumped off a bridge. Because that sounds like the worst thing in the world in Michael's sort of, perspective.
Yeah, since he did do a whole thing about Bono and nicknames and how much of a douchebag he is. That was months and months ago, though. But yeah, no, I heard that Kendrick's album is going to drop on Good Friday.
Friday, yeah.
Now, what's the title of the album?
Damn.
Damn. Okay. All right.
And all the names of the songs, it's all one-word names. Most of them, I think, are the deadly sins: pride, lust, envy, stuff like that. Sloth, maybe. I don't think sloth was one of them. But everything is just one word. I'm digging it, man. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, because Humble.
Fuck if Bono's on it.
Because Humble was a track off of it, right?
Yeah, that's right. So some of them were sins, some of them were virtues. So all of them one word. God is one of them.
Interesting.
Duckworth, his last name, is one of them.
His name is Kendrick Lamar Duckworth?
Yeah.
I did not know that. I did not know that. Huh.
You can't be an MC named Duckworth. That don't work.
No, that does not work. It makes me think of the movie Mighty Ducks, because wasn't that the guy's name was Duckworth? So
like Kevin Duckworth was a center on the Portland Trailblazers in like
God.
1992.
He was. Oh my God! And that was like Clyde the Glide was on that team.
Yeah,
and Terry Porter. Oh my God!
Cliff Robinson.
Oh God, that is old school. All right, Michael, rescue us from this dumbass conversation.
First-class legroom, free cocktails for everyone, and a schedule you can depend on.
Ooh-wee. Al's Dawn. This Week in Hip Hop. Michael Burns. All things that are currently happening right now. Hopefully everyone's doing well. It was a big week in hip hop, and if you don't know that, it's probably because you're just not very smart. The most important, how do we phrase this? The most important mainstream rap artist put an album out this week. It is called Damn. It is by a man named Kendrick Lamar, who also goes by the name Kung Fu Kenny. And you can hear Kid Capri scream that all over this record. But it came out. We anticipated this for a while, ever since The Heart Part 4 dropped a few weeks ago. We have it. There was speculation on whether this would be kind of in, kind of following To Pimp a Butterfly with a similar sound and aesthetic. There was some that doubted that he could have another awesome record. I think the general consensus is that this album is very good. It's hard to make grand pronouncements about a thing 3 days after it came out. But it's really good. It's really strong. And while I would not want to do some ranking bullshit where I tried to tell you where this sat in the context of Kendrick's other records, it's in the conversation. It's not in a different universe from Good Kid, Mad City or To Pimp a Butterfly. So that's great. And most importantly, not most importantly, it's just the thing I'm saying. But one of the things that really stood out to me on this album is that it's very clear that he's not trying to carry on that aesthetic and sound that we had on To Pimp a Butterfly, that very funk and soul-filled and super pro black jazz influenced record. He's not trying to have a follow-up to that record. This is a completely different project. And I think if To Pimp a Butterfly was largely about Kendrick's perspective on a particular political moment and in particular on issues of blackness in America, I think Damn is a record about Kendrick, his personality, his perspective, his point of view. To Pimp a Butterfly, Kendrick was looking outward on the world and society and political structures. I think this record is a lot more about him looking inward, talking about himself, his passions, his contradictions, his struggles. Most importantly for my concerns, because I'm an old motherfucker that likes rapidy rap music, the rapping on the record is crazy. They did a podcast right after it came out the other night on The Ringer where they talked about it. And something they noted, and I forget who said this exactly, but it was on one of the Ringer podcasts. They talked about the pure athleticism of Kendrick's rapping. And that comes through so well. And it's something that it's hard to explain, but when you listen to him, and I don't know if any of you saw this, but they live streamed his Coachella performance from the other night. When you watch this guy rap and listen to him rap, there is just something athletic about it. And you wonder how he is not tired. And the way that he has that control to start and stop his voice, to at times get a little bit ahead of the beat, at times to lag a little bit behind the beat to kind of like fuck with the time signatures. Something athletic about it, and it's awesome. Another big part of the conversation that's happening already and will continue to happen in the coming weeks is he the best rapper alive shit? I don't know, and I don't know if that's a good conversation to have. I do know that he's the best, mainstream rapper alive right now. When I say mainstream, I just mean the type of rap artist that can close out Coachella and sell millions of records and all that sort of shit. So in the way that Biggie and Nas and Jay have all at one time been the quote unquote, best rapper alive. Yes, I intentionally left Lil Wayne out. Deal with it. Listen to the Clips' views on Wayne if you're mad at me. His metaphors are boring. But I think that Kendrick is in that conversation, right? He's the greatest rapper alive in that sense. And definitely the only West Coast rapper besides Tupac to ever really have that title. So this is important. But the record, you've probably listened to it. You probably listened to it multiple times. And if you haven't listened to it, I think you probably never will listen to it because there's something about you. There's something about you that when this record came out and you heard everyone talking about it, you saw people talking about it on social media, you said to yourself, that's not for me. Because you've spent, 26 to 34 years ignoring rap music, ignoring anything that comes probably from black people. You're probably racist. Here's what I'm saying. If you haven't listened to the Kendrick record yet, you are racist. And I'm saying that, and I'm standing by that. But either way, you've listened to it. You know it's really good. I'll talk about a few tracks that I thought were particularly awesome. But like I said before, I think the whole record's really strong. DNA, the second song on the record, starts off so hard. Kendrick comes out of the gates and punches you in the fucking jaw. And he does something that I didn't think was possible, which is have another really good rap song over a beat made by Mike Will Made It. Mike Will Made It, who famously produced a song for Miley Cyrus where she raps about wearing J's. Woo! But really good. But I like that right after that we have this song, Yeah, which is so chill. And this record's great because we have these really hard-hitting moments and these super chill moments. Element's one of my favorite songs. I like all the beat switches on it. And this song seems like he's firing a lot of shots. And I don't want to get too much into sort of speculations on rap beef, but it just seems pretty clear that Kendrick is sending subliminals towards people like Drake and occasionally Big Sean. I just think this is a fact. I think it's something that's happening. There was some talk on the internet about the song God on this record, which is good, being a sort of troll of Drake. But to me, Element sounds like the one that would be a sort of troll of Drake because the beat sounds like something that Drake would rap over. The kind of sung chorus sounds like something Drake would do. But it's funny that he talks about slapping someone and making it look sexy, because famously Drake got slapped in the face by Diddy. Loyalty featuring Rihanna. Woo! This one sounds like it might have the most potential to be a hit single. And it's really dope that Rihanna raps on this song. And I think if you really liked the Rihanna record that came out last year, Anti, which you probably did like, unless you're a racist. But if you listen to that record, the song Consideration was a huge standout, featuring SZA, who's also a member of the Top Dog family. Loyalty to me seems like a song that exists in that same universe, like Rihanna doing something interesting and hip-hop influenced, rapping as much as she is singing, but it's a really good song. Lust, another song I like a lot. I really dig the like British children samples on that one. That sounded weird. I'm just going to say it sounded weird, but there's these samples. It sounds like a young English person. It's looped in an interesting way. I actually thought Lust was the song that James Blake was on, just because it had such a Londony feet to the beat, feel to the beat. Oh my God, I can't talk. But Element's actually the song James Blake was on. Now, XXX. This is the song that I spent weeks getting ready to fucking hate, because the track list came out and it said U2 was on this goddamn record, and I was thinking like, great, Kendrick's gonna ruin it, putting U2 on this record. But I guess Bono took a break from saving all the orphans in Africa with cell phone marketing, and it's good. Oh my God, a song featuring U2, produced by Mike Will Made It, is so good. It's this emotional and detailed song that gives an account of where America's at right now. It hits really hard at times, and then Bono just slides through for a little chorus. It's nice. He's not there for long, and I think if we didn't know it was U2, we would just think it was some random guy. The XXX, my second favorite song on the album. Oh no, now you're wondering what's his favorite. We'll get there. Chill out. Fear, I just want to point out, it's produced by Alchemist. That's great, and I love that Kendrick is one of the few artists that can have a Mike Will beat and an Alchemist beat on the same record. The final song on the record, Duckworth, is my personal favorite track. I like that it ends in such a soulful way, and it ends in a way that's really grounded in hip-hop. What I mean by that is, like, we have Ninth Wonder production. Ninth Wonder you probably know as well. If you don't know Ninth Wonder, you know what you are. But the beat kills, and it's really cool that Ninth Wonder for a while I felt like was in this cycle of just producing the same type of soul loop that was really good, but I kind of wanted something more. Really step things up a bit here. He's sticking within that lane of a classic soulful chopped up beat, but doing some things with the production and some of the effects that manipulate the samples in really cool ways. So it's grounded in hip hop because of that. It's also grounded in hip hop because it's a storytelling song. It tells a very personal story. It tells us about his life. It tells us in particular that the president of TDE almost murdered Kendrick's dad, but Kendrick's dad hooked him up with free food at the KFC he worked at, so he didn't get robbed or killed. Because he didn't get robbed or killed, he was able to produce a child named Kendrick, because that child grew up and became the rap king. We have this record now, but it's just crazy to hear that story told over this. And it's a wild coincidence. And he talks about what it's like when the greatest rapper comes from coincidence. Final thing on this is, yeah, Kid Capri vocals all over the record. It's awesome. I love it. Overall, I give this 5 tacos out of 5. That's not a rating system we do here. I just started it. But either way, Kendrick Lamar, damn, in a year of incredible hip-hop records, and I mean that. This year is so good that I'm going to go back next week and talk about albums that came out this past week that got overshadowed by Kendrick. Stuff like, I don't know, Gold Link, Joey Badass, Styles P and Talib Kweli. But damn, at this point, is the strongest album of the year, maybe the strongest album of the past calendar year. It shows us very clearly that Kendrick Lamar is one of the most important, if not the most important artist working in hip-hop today. He has important shit to say, and he says it in a fucking virtuosic way, and you should listen to this, and you should love it. And I'll be back next week, This Week in Hip-Hop. Al's Dawn, Michael Burns. Be good to yourself, be good to your friends, and if you see a turtle on the road, help it cross so a car doesn't kill it. Bye.
Cruising the sky as smoothly as a bird, you scarcely realize you are traveling.
All right, thanks for that, Michael. How you feeling about Damn, Austin?
Yeah, man, it's really good. It's hard because when something has so much hype and so much expectation, I only got to listen to it one time through, and then it was Easter weekend, and I was doing kind of like family-oriented things, So I didn't get to listen to it at all. And, during Christmas meal, we were playing music, and I was in charge of playing the music, and it was, hey, should I put the Kendrick Lamar album on, or is it smooth jazz? And smooth jazz went out for the family soundtrack while everyone was eating dinner. So
That should never happen. Although I agree that Damn is not dinner table material.
yeah, exactly. Especially when they're like little children and stuff. So yeah, it was.
You gotta expose children to the truth sometime, man.
That's what that was my argument, but I lost. Okay, I'm starting to learn that in this world that our type of thinking, Troy, it isn't the majority. So things that I think are good ideas aren't always the best ideas.
I don't believe that, man.
I agree with you. I am 100% with you. So no, I didn't get to listen to it as much as I wanted. I did after I listened to Michael's segment, though. I did obviously go back and I listened to some of the selected tracks. Like I really wanted to listen to the U2 track again, and because I liked it. I'm a sucker for U2 anyway. I know motherfuckers hate on Bono, and he is a bit of a douche, but that's all right, man. I can still remember the early days of U2 and block out some of the more recent errs in his steps. But no, so I listened to a couple of the tracks, and then I listened to the last track, and I wanted to listen to. I can't remember which one it was, but it was the one, like the first one that was produced by the Miley Cyrus producer dude. So I wanted to check that one out. But yeah, I gotta listen to it some more. I'm assuming that you are in love with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as huge into it as I was Pimp a Butterfly. And I'm not sure you're supposed to be. I think it's a little bit more of a contemporary album. But though, I have a feeling we might talk about this a little more later, so
yeah,
I'll save some more of my thoughts about it. But I'm definitely loving listening to it. I mean, when X-Rated comes on, or DNA, and Kendrick just goes nuts on it, yeah. I may have been humming the beginning of DNA, not humming, but softly speaking it to myself in class earlier, and someone caught me.
Did they recognize it?
I mean, I'm assuming so. Yeah, that was why.
Oh, awesome. Is it? Do you play music or anything for your students ever?
Occasionally, not like a regular thing.
Would you use, because a lot of especially philosophy, anthropology, and the humanities, they like to use film as a heuristic. Would you ever do that with an album?
Yeah, I thought about that a lot, whether or not I would do that. I've never really found an occasion where I think it would be helpful instead of distracting, but I'm very open to the possibility and would love to figure out how to do that. Have you?
The only thing I used to do is I used to have music playing when my students would come into class, and so I'd always have music playing, and then we would break up into reading groups sometimes or discussion groups, and I would play music in the background while they would go into discussion groups. But I'd always play something interesting, like jazz or some sort of instrumental. I wouldn't play, I don't know, like I was talking earlier about like fucking, I don't know, Buck Cherry or Rob Zombie or something like that, like nostalgic 90s music that just happens to come on my playlist.
Buck Cherry? Fuck me, man. Don't talk about Buck Cherry.
I mean, I'm just trying to think of what could possibly pop up on my playlist, that would be distracting. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think you'd play Damn for that purpose, though.
Yeah.
Unless you wanted to be like punny and put Humble on and be like, sit down. Be humble when they're walking.
Yeah, no. Or but what if we were teaching about some sort of theological concept and we were talking about, vices and virtues and sins and integrity and stuff like that? You could maybe put the album on, right? It'd be an interesting teaching device.
Could they use Damn as the catechism? Talk about the cardinal virtues and the deadly sins?
In liberation theology, it kind of is a catechism, isn't it? So, yeah, no, it's good though. But I definitely want to kind of go back, and now that I'm back into the swing of things in the office, and I can play music while I'm doing work and stuff like that, I think I'll probably rock it on repeat a couple of times and pay a little bit more attention to it.
Yeah, I'm all about that, and maybe we'll talk about it later.
Sounds good to me. Foreshadowing. All right, so let's go ahead and
fuck.
I don't know, man. I'm tired. My brain gets a little loopy. All right, let's wrap up this episode. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Owls at Dawn. Troy, where can the people find us?
You can find us on Twitter and on Instagram at owls_@_Don.
Mm-hmm.
You can also email us at owls@dawnpodcast@gmail.com.
Mm-hmm.
And find us on the intertubes at owls@dawn.com. Is that correct?
owls@dawn.com. That is correct.
Yeah. Also, go to iTunes and drop us a 5-star review. We would really appreciate that.
Yes.
And other than that, you ready to sign off?
Yes, sir.
All right. Das Vidania, Amerikanski.